Everyone. Sorry, let me just get rid of this message. There we go. Hello. Right. Sorry, let me just. Cool. Right, I'm ready to go. Thank you so much for having me this evening. I'm genuinely very sorry that we can't all be in the Botanical Institute this evening. But I'm hoping that next time, if there is a next time, we can all meet in person. My name is Leif. I'm a botanist, a writer, a science communicator, and I spend most of my time trying to convince people that plants are awesome through various different avenues like writing books, running courses, giving talks, visiting schools sometimes, and living on social media, as it seems, and just doing bits here and there to try and share my love for wild plants with people who don't necessarily engage with them on a day-to-day basis. Now, it was with great sadness that I began preparing for this talk, because it suddenly occurred to me that at the ripe old age of 27, I am no longer in the next generation of botanists, but rather now part of the current generation of botanists who are looking ahead to inspire those who will come along after us. Now, this is a brand new talk. I've never given this one before, and it's one that I'm planning to tinker with and add to over the next few weeks and months. And I'm hoping that as I delve deeper into this task, this challenge of helping to grow the next generation of botanists, that it will develop and evolve, and I'll be able to return one day, hopefully in person, and provide you with all of the answers. But I will just start by saying that I don't currently have all the answers. I'm not an expert. I don't know for sure how to find the solutions to this problem. It's not an easy one, and it's a problem that I've only recently properly started to think about. But I'm very much up for the challenge, and I feel like it's a very achievable goal. So this evening, I'm going to go through some of the challenges that are faced by getting young people into botany, as well as some of the things which I feel like both professionals but also the everyday person can do to try and help grow the next generation of botanists. So first of all, it is a real honor to be speaking to you on Earth Day. It's mind-boggling that we even need to have an Earth Day, but it's been fantastic today to see all these posts across social media putting our sort of drive towards sustainability into the limelight. But yeah, the Earth, nice little picture of it here. When you look at our planet from space, you immediately see two of the most important things in our lives. You've got water and you've got plants. And the list of reasons why we should all take notice of plants more often is endless. Just a few things here. They are, of course, incredibly beautiful. They have amazing stories that need telling. There's the small matter of the fact that they provide us with our food and oxygen, and they play this major role in the solutions to all our pressing environmental problems. So why, given all that, do we not pay plants more attention? This is the huge question that I honestly don't know the answer to. I spend my entire life paying plants attention, and I don't really know why more people don't. But we as humans are completely and utterly dependent on plants, from our food to our atmosphere. And as I've said, they play this major part in the solution for all the environmental issues that we're currently facing. And we need to make sure that people understand that, to make sure that we don't continue taking plants for granted. Because the strange thing is, we do like plants. The horticultural industry is enormous here in the UK. We have about 23 million gardens, I found out today. About 87% of households in the UK have gardens. And there have also been these brief periods in recent human history when plants have actually been really popular. So when these fads, for want of a better term, spread through the country, you had pteridamania, fern fever, you had orchid delirium, these sort of periods of public obsession with these groups of plants. And that they would go out and find and collect, and obviously that's a different issue that I won't be talking about today. But my point is that getting people obsessed with plants and really into plants is not impossible. It's happened before, and I'm convinced that there is a way to do it now in the 21st century. I just haven't quite figured out what it is yet, but it is possible. So, the challenge. Botanists are the people who know how to restore damaged landscapes, how to feed people, how to repair the damage done to our climate. But the problem is they don't grow on trees, which is probably actually a good thing, because I think people would think we're even stranger if we grow on trees, but we don't, so that's good. But sadly, in a society as disconnected from nature as our one is, the default is not, it's not us being interested. The default is very much us not being interested. So the challenge is how to stimulate and then maintain that initial interest. And there are so many statistics out there that make you do a double take. There was this study back in 2019 where researchers showed pictures of British wildlife to 1,000 school children between the ages of 5 and 16. And they found that 1 in 4 couldn't tell you what a conker was. They found that nearly half couldn't tell you what brambles were, what blackberries were, and what bluebells were. So so stimulating and maintaining that initial interest is so important, but it's so difficult. And we're sort of faced with this real uphill battle. But most amazingly from that study, to me at least, was this finding that slightly over half of UK children, from that sample anyway, couldn't identify a stinging nettle. Which, I don't know, that stat alone is just so emblematic of the fact childhoods have just moved indoors, because we all know how we learned how to identify stinging nettle, right? You fall into a stand of nettles for the first time and you do not forget that experience for quite a long time. So it's just extraordinary to me that more than half of children don't know what a stinging nettle is. So the challenge is to turn this sort of shallow focus we have to a deep one, and turn what is currently the green screen of the animal kingdom into this living collection of characters that we need to share, we need to recognize their importance. And in the age of biodiversity crises and climate change and needing to find new medicines, it has never ever been more important to be able to identify plants and to learn about them. So, plant blindness, that phrase that we've become so used to now. Plant blindness is, for those who haven't come across the term, an inability to notice plants growing in the environment and to pay attention to them on a day-to-day basis. It's also a lack of recognition when it comes to the importance of plants for both the climate and for human life. It's the inability to appreciate the aesthetic features of plant life forms and the anthropocentric view that animals are more important than plants. They're superior to plants and therefore more worthy of our attention. Now, animal-centered teaching and broadcasting are partly at fault for this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Teaching generations of people that plants are in some way inferior, which is obviously just not true. But one of the things which really, really sums up plant blindness for me is the biological species concept. The idea that a species is a group of similar looking organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. And this definition was at one point not really considered so anymore, but at one point it was the way that we defined a species. And yet, I've just spent 4 years studying a group of plants that look completely different, and yet they can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. So they just don't fit this definition at all. And yet this definition was once held up as this sort of standard for what a species is. So viewing animals as more similar to us or more interesting encourages much greater empathy. And when it comes to making decisions about conservation, empathy plays this huge, huge role, because most people, seeing a panda rolling around with a stick of bamboo clasped between its paws will feel a real tug on the heartstrings, but they just don't, they don't get that same feeling when they see, Amazon deforestation occurring, or wood calamint, this plant here, at its last UK site. And even within animal conservation, most of that funding actually goes, as you're probably aware, to mammals, particularly mammals with forward-facing eyes, the species that we can relate to the most, that are most similar to us. And obviously, if we're to change this, it's so crucial to help people build those emotional connections with plants as well as animals. And this is best done at a really young age. So one of the main reasons I think it's harder to enthuse people about plants than it is animals is that they're more different to us than animals are, obviously. But they cope with all the same challenges that animals have to face. And this is why I just can't understand how much more popular animals are than plants. Because they have to face all these challenges that animals have to face, but they have to do it while rooted to the spot. It's just so amazing. You can't chase after things to get food, no problem. We'll just figure out a way to make food from the sun. Need a healthier diet for growth, but you can't go to the supermarket to get your nitrogen pills. Make friends with a nitrogen fixing bacterium. It just all these things, protecting themselves using thorns or deadly poisons, whatever it might be. Just really, really cool ways of dealing with the challenges you face. And yet people just aren't as interested for whatever reason. Now, education is one of the keys to this problem. It's fundamental, but it's not going to change overnight. Now, I'm going to preface this section on education with a disclaimer. I am not a teacher. I do not know what it's like having to teach biology to a group of children. So I'm very aware that it's very easy for me to sit here and say everything I'm about to say. But these are just a few of my own thoughts and things that I've picked up over the years, listening to other people talking about this. So in 2013, the final botany degree in the UK saw its students graduate. And this was the year that I was just starting university, and it really annoyed me that I just missed this cutoff point for doing a botany degree. There are still a handful of plant science undergraduate degrees, but no more traditional botany. I actually ended up doing biology in the end. But universities have moved away from taxonomy and classification and moving more towards the genetics, the agriculture, the molecular biology, which occurs to me as sort of both necessary and dangerous. Yes, we need more molecular biologists working on plants, of course we do, but we also really need people to be able to identify the plants in the first place. You know, to do ecological surveys, to discover and document new species. And these are things which they lead to the protection of biodiversity, and they lead to things like discovering new medicines. So they're really, really important. But I don't think that university is the problem that we need to deal with. It's very much at schools that that sort of this problem really not originates, perhaps, but is more of a problem. But yeah, and that sort of loss of interest, if it was there in the first place at all, at school, is therefore not then translated into applications to plant science degrees. And the universities, the only reason they're not offering these courses, right, is because there's no demand for it. And whether we like it or not, universities are financially driven organizations. So if there aren't any students willing to give them money to learn about plants, they simply aren't going to teach it. So if we target the problem in schools and manage to improve the situation there, then hopefully that will eventually filter through to increasing the number of plant science courses available at universities. This is, of course, easier said than done. I'm very aware of that. But I think the need to encourage an empathy and passion for plants is a really, really important one, to sort of open up the world of plants in a way that children haven't seen before. Like this image here on the right, pretty much everyone would have seen a daisy in the grass, even if they don't know what it is. So I think, you know, kids can see just how small this tiny little wall speedwell is underneath this blue flowered plant. There's a whole other world down there to discover. I found this image so inspiring. All thanks to Tristan, who let me use it. But at the moment, there is plant science in the school curriculum. It's not the absence of it that's the problem. It's the fact that what children get taught tends to be incredibly dry. So things like photosynthesis and xylem and phloem and starch production, they're all important things, but we need to make plants more engaging. We need to make them more relevant. It's very easy for me to say this, not being a teacher myself. So I appreciate there are lots of things to teach, and there isn't always time to think out cool ways to teach it all. But there's such an emphasis on interesting animals in these courses, and then plants are the thing that you have to study in order to be able to study the animals. And this animal-centric way of teaching carries over to more general biological phenomena as well. So, for example, when I was at school, I learned about evolution in the context of Darwin's finches. I learned about adaptations to the environment in the context of whales, in the context of polar bears. And instead, with just a few little changes, you know, we could learn about evolution in pitcher plants and adaptations that plants develop to, you know, in response to their particular environments. I think it's really important that there's an equal balance, an equal number of plants and animal examples used in school and biology lessons. And with the plant examples then, to use the most memorable, exciting plant images possible to sort of offset those animal-centric biases. And to do this, of course, there needs to be a focus on teacher training. Teaching the teacher trainers is so incredibly important if we're to achieve this. It's like the saying, give someone a fish and you feed them for a day, teach them to fish and you feed them for a lifetime. But here, I guess the equivalent is engage a child with a plant and you grow a botanist, and engage a teacher with a plant and you grow a generation of botanists. Sort of. It's a fairly tenuous analogy, but you get what I'm saying. And again, the biology teachers as well, they tend not to have had any botanical background. And so those with biology degrees will usually have specialized in zoology or, I don't know, biomedical science. And so training them to make their teaching more biologically inclusive is a crucial step as well if we're to address this plant blindness bias. So in terms of the changes that schools need to make, and I'll reiterate here that I'm not a teacher, I'm not an expert. These are just a few things that I've come across over the last few years that have really stuck with me. One thing I hear a lot is the idea of teaching young school children all about the amazing, wacky, wonderful world of plants before they learn about photosynthesis and all the other important but slightly more boring things, and sort of really get that passion and sort of ignite the flame before it gets snuffed out. Yeah, I think photosynthesis and things are obviously very important. They also can be very interesting, of course. I'm not saying they're not interesting subjects, but in terms of igniting that interest, I think you need to start with something different. I think there's also something really positive about that. It's something we can change very easily. And yeah, all it takes is a few good ideas, I think. So one way to facilitate this could be to fill classrooms with plants. In my secondary school biology classroom, we had a couple of spider plants on the windowsill. There are a few like half dead geraniums around. And obviously this didn't exactly inspire many of my friends, nor me, to be honest. And I'd be surprised if that was wildly different to most biology classrooms, but I could be wrong. But imagine if you walked into a biology classroom and it's just a jungle of plants. As you can see, I've set up my my workspace with just surrounded by plants, and it's just, I really feel like I'm in a jungle, which is just amazing. But plants like Monstera, which is this one I've got here, the Swiss cheese plant, they're relatively cheap. They very quickly get to a large size. I just got mine from Morrison's, so they're very, very easily accessible. But you could use this to teach kids about defense mimicry or adventitious roots. It puts out these roots which just go everywhere, and yeah, they're quite annoying actually sitting next to it because you suddenly find one sticking into your face. But what else? You could create like a terrarium type thing with carnivorous plants in it, maybe to teach students about plant movement or adaptations to living in a harsh environment, or even biochemistry and that sort of thing. So having plants in the classroom, it would give pupils a chance not only to learn in a slightly more hands-on way, but it also provides them the chance to care for them in the classroom or to take them home, to look after them perhaps. And this all helps build up those all important connections and that empathy with plants. So another idea that I liked was using the local nature to teach biology. I recently learnt that primary schools in the Shetlands use their local wildflowers to help them teach science to their students, which is just amazing. I'm not entirely sure how they do it yet. I'm actually going up there later in the year to find out. But it's just amazing that they just use their local wildflowers to teach biology. And I'm really hoping that the new natural history GCSE, which is being developed at the moment, I really hope it makes it into schools. But it should then hopefully provide that link between what kids learn in the classroom and what's actually going on outside in the bit of grass, outside the classroom window. Because keeping kids in tune with what's living and growing around them in their day-to-day lives is so important. And I'm not talking about going out and doing quadrats, just to be clear, because let's be honest, you have to really, really, really love plants already to get on board with quadrats. I'm talking about things like setting up scavenger hunts for urban plants growing out of wall cracks around the school site. I'm talking about, you could create a plant Pokédex for the wildflowers growing in a wildlife garden, getting students to describe their traits, highlighting medicinal uses, plant poisons, spiky defenses, whatever it might be. And these are just random ideas, but I think there are a bunch of exciting ways to help kids discover that sort of excitement of plant hunting. This could be teacher driven, potentially, or if we linked amateur botanists or plant researchers around the country to their local schools, then you could have botanists leading sessions like this. When I go into primary schools to talk about plants, I get the kids to design their own plant. So I talk to them about adaptations and things, and then I get them to design their own plant, and they come up with some amazingly wacky ideas, the most amazing adaptations, many of which are real life adaptations, and they find it really cool when they realize that. And finally, there's an increasing number of young people who are beginning to stand up for our climate and take things into their own hands. I've probably seen a lot of that today, of course. You only have to look at people like Greta Thunberg and Dara McAnulty and people like that, who are doing such wonderful work. And they are just, inspiring this next generation to find their voice for the climate. So there are opportunities here to teach, to use that. So obviously it's a terrible thing, the climate crisis, but we can use that to teach people, young people, about trees, about grasslands, about where to plant trees and where not to plant trees, sphagnum mosses and that kind of thing, all in the context of carbon sequestration. So animal-centric teaching is one of the problems, and animal-centric broadcasting is another. So in many ways, young people are at least aware of the natural world thanks to TV documentaries like Planet Earth. More people between the ages of 16 to 34 watch Planet Earth 2 than they did The X Factor, which I thought was brilliant. And nature documentaries, of course, are such an important way. They're such a vital way to communicate this stuff, but they aren't nearly inclusive enough. I'm sure you're aware, you all have seen these programs, Planet Earth, Planet Earth 2, all the BBC Earth ones, Spring Watch, whatever it might be. They're just massively dominated by animals, particularly the vertebrates. The peak of Planet Earth 2, they had 14.4 million viewers at their peak. And just imagine if there had been this equal animal-plant balance. Imagine how many young people that would have reached. It's so frustrating just watching these programs, which are obviously stunning, but just there are never any plants. It's incredibly annoying. The plants are the background in these shows. The animals, the actors, the plants are the backgrounds. And it's not just in David Attenborough documentaries. Springwatch suffers from this as well. You get a feature on, I don't know, bats or something, and it will likely begin with, gratuitous shots of wildflower meadows. There will be oxeye daisies, and there will be orchids, and there will be hawkbits and clovers and things, some nice insects flying around, and then woof, the bat comes in, and that's it. It's time for the mammals. I don't mean any disrespect to bats. I absolutely love bats. They are great and very, very important, obviously, but when they finish showing the bats, they cut straight back to the empty blue tit nest that we've all seen 10 times in the last half an hour, with no mention of those wildflowers at all. And I love Springwatch so much. It's such a vital source. But this happens just again, and I'm really fed up with it now. So yeah, we'll have to sort that one out. I met David Attenborough once, and I told him about how much I loved The Private Life of Plants, which came out was just before my first birthday, so I wasn't yet 1 year old, which is obviously a long time ago now. And I told him that, and he looked at me and he said, "Thank you for saying that." The Private Life of Plants is my favorite documentary that I've ever worked on, and I don't know why they don't do more on plants. And obviously, this is something which has stuck with me, something I'll never forget. And it just screams to me that the reason plants aren't on our screens is because they don't produce the viewing numbers. Unfortunately, whether we like it or not, TV is all about the number of eyes glued to screens, and it just doesn't seem to produce that as many people as they want. There is the Green Planets, though, this thing in the bottom right-hand corner. It's one of the new BBC documentaries. It's coming out next year, I think. It was meant to come out this year, but it's been delayed because of the pandemic. And I'm hoping that with all the new technology that we've got now, it will sort of really do justice to plants and really bring botany to life for people. And one last thought I had, which I would love to see, seems quite unlikely, but I would love to see this, was wouldn't it be brilliant if Disney turned around and said, okay, let's make our next film about plants? Imagine if there was a Disney film where all the characters are plants, even if they walk around, jump around, run around like animals. It would help children and plenty of adults, to be honest, realize that plants are living creatures. You know, it sounds like a far-fetched dream, but I just think that would be amazing and really, really popular. We need plant heroes like that. So one of the main reasons why young people know less about nature now than they might have done a few hundred years ago is almost certainly because our lives have become increasingly urban. We've moved into towns and cities. We just aren't really living where these things are anymore in the same way that we once did. So, you know, parents and grandparents aren't passing that knowledge on like they would have once done because there's no need to. Most of the stuff just isn't around anymore. What's more, we're also now living in a time where childhoods have moved indoors. Outdoor activities are sadly now the exception rather than the norm. So opportunities for children to interact with plants, to connect with them, to collect conkers, to eat blackberries, to play, you know, do you like butter, where you put your buttercup under your chin. And these experiences are becoming increasingly rare. And there was a study by Natural England a couple of years ago that found that 1 in 5 children in England's most deprived areas spend no time in the natural environment. 1 in 5, no time in the natural environment. I just can't believe that. Children learn about nature by playing in it. So by creating more urban green spaces and putting more plants in cities, particularly in our most deprived urban areas, it's just so important for encouraging those interests rather than just letting them getting immediately snuffed out. One of the advantages, though, of the various lockdowns that we've experienced over the last year or so has been this very slight respite for nature. In particular, last spring, in lockdown 1, suddenly you had road verges that weren't being cut, you had streets that weren't being sprayed with weed killer, and you had the most wonderful displays of spring wildflowers growing on road verges, from pavement cracks, from wall cracks, all over the country. And I was living in London for the first lockdown last year, and so was sharing the urban wildflowers that I was finding on the street on social media, and the reaction was amazing. I was getting so many messages from people who were saying things like, you know, they'd never noticed these plants before. They looked out for them every day on their walks now. They hadn't realized how beautiful weeds could be, that sort of thing. And all these messages just filled me with hope and made me think, well, actually, maybe getting people into plants isn't quite as impossible as I once thought it was. connect with nature, learn to love it, care for it. But knowing what the plants are in your local area provides a sort of sense of place, and it really connects you to the wildlife in your environment. Now, this is perhaps the area I'm most comfortable talking about. It's the one I have most experience with. And whether you love it or hate it, social media is undeniably a very, very powerful tool, and something that I really think needs to be embraced. Loads of people are embracing it already, which is great. But when I ask people what the main barriers are to people developing an interest in botany and in nature, one of the commonest responses is kids spend too long on their phones rather than getting outside. And whether that's true or not, probably is true, but I think the task of getting kids off their phones is much more difficult than enthusing people about plants. So I think we should really embrace the fact that kids are constantly on their phones and find ways to use that to enthuse them about plants. So one of the most important things, and it's a strange way of phrasing it perhaps, but one of the most important things is bringing plants to life. We have to find ways to sort of show that they're alive, given that they obviously live on a completely different time scale to us. Watching time-lapse footage of a plant, it becomes immediately very obvious very quickly that plants are living creatures. They explore their environments, they fight off competition, they look for food, just as animals do. And I'm very excited. I'm just about to buy a time-lapse camera. So I'm looking forward to sharing some time lapses of my local plants on social media this summer. Footage of them like following the sun and like buds bursting into leaf or into flower, that sort of thing. I'm really hoping it will sort of, open people's eyes to the day-to-day life of plants that we just don't see otherwise. So it's not difficult to convince people that plants are important. The fact that they provide us with our food and our oxygen is pretty hard to argue against. And that argument still has to be made, of course, but because many people don't understand quite how important plants are. But once you've made the argument, people are generally convinced by that. The challenge is getting people emotionally invested in plants so that they develop these bonds for them, they start to care for them. And that's where social media can play such an important role. Now, I've highlighted 4 social media platforms here: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I'm currently a member of Twitter and Instagram. And I try my best to share my love of plants on those platforms. But there's one problem with this, and that is that the botanists of tomorrow, the kids who aren't currently interested in plants, they aren't on Twitter and they aren't on Instagram, and they're all on TikTok. Now, for those of you who don't know, TikTok is a simple platform. It allows users to share short videos. It's a very sort of consumerist sort of platform, and it is the platform for young people at the moment. More than 60% of its users are between the age of 16 and 24. 80% of its users are 16 to 34. And it's been something that I've been meaning to get involved with for a while now, but I haven't quite built up the courage yet. Not that I have time for another social media platform. But I actually think that TikTok is the most important at the moment, at least, just because the content you put out there is going to be watched, or is more likely to be watched by the next generation. And I feel like there's this huge sort of chance, there's this big opportunity to break out of the social media echo, like the nature echo chamber that I certainly exist within. It's, what I want to do is to reach young people who they haven't necessarily looked at plants before, haven't necessarily thought twice about, the weeds on the street or whatever it might be. And TikTok is just, I'm so convinced, is the way to do this. You can't share photos on TikTok, it's just videos. So it does at least line up very nicely with my short time lapses, which I'm hoping will really bring them to life. So that's my next challenge on social media, is to take on the world of TikTok. But social media is far more useful than that. It's useful for helping people to see that they are not alone in having an interest in plants. People, as a general rule, tend to be sheep. We tend to gravitate towards the thing that everyone else is doing. Though obviously there are plenty of exceptions, because we don't want to be doing something by ourselves. And so using social media to show that there are actually loads of people who are going out to look for plants, a lot of people of a similar age as well, and to show that there's this community of like-minded individuals is so crucial for encouraging an interest in people who've just discovered plants. And so this links into my final point here, which is about role models. Role models are so ridiculously important. When I was a teenager, all of my botanical idols were proper adults. They were all over the age of 40, the vast majority of retirement age. And I mean absolutely no disrespect when I say this. The botanists I learned from, who I still learn from, were and are absolutely wonderful people who welcomed me. They generously shared their knowledge with me, and I can safely say that I wouldn't be where I am today without them. But the fact that I didn't have a botanical idol or role model who was my age or just a bit older than me, someone who I could look up to, who was just on the next step in life, as it were, slightly ahead of me, it always frustrated me so much. But in the age of social media, these people exist and these people are accessible. People like, Josh Stiles, Sarah Middleton, Ryan Clark, Joshua Aduele. There are loads of people now who, there are just a few names, who are on social media, they're sharing their love for plants and making it more relevant to other young people. So just seeing someone else in their 20s or even younger talking about plants in an open way like this makes it accessible, much more relatable. And now with social media, young people have botanical role models, and I just think that's so important. So to finish, the thing which gives me the most hope is this. I strongly believe that every single human child is innately curious about nature. Give a child, a toddler, a wriggling worm, give them a dandelion clock to blow, and you just see their delight at having something, wriggling around their hand or something that they can blow off into the wind. Children are by default naturally interested in the natural world. So we just need to change things so that interest isn't immediately snuffed out, as it so often sadly is in our modern day society. So yes, I don't have all the answers yet. I will do one day, I'm convinced. But as I've said, I'm completely convinced that this is possible, that we can engage the younger generations with the wonderful world of plants. I think it's important that we keep talking about it, we keep brainstorming ideas, thinking up new things that might work, and most of all, encouraging one another while we're doing so. And my best piece of advice when it comes to growing the next generation of botanists is simply to talk to people about plants. You can't get excited about something if you don't know it exists. So whether you're, talking to a stranger who's discovered you with your bum sticking out of a bush, looking at something cool, or talking to your friend who asks you what you did at the weekend, just talk to people about plants. And do it. It's this normal thing. It's not a weird thing you have to bring up. This is something I learned in the last few years. Is I now just talk about it as if it's the most normal thing in the world with my friends and things. And that just massively normalizes it. So yeah, that's my one piece of take-home advice. Because, you know, when we recycle things, or when we turn off the lights when we leave the room, we do those things not because we think we as individuals are going to change the world, save the world, but because we're doing our part. And so I think we as botanists, you know, you just have to do your little bits here and there, and together, hopefully, we can all come together and inspire that next generation of botanists. So you'll be glad to hear that's it from me. Thank you so much for listening. And yeah, very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Leif.